As dawn broke over a fog-draped battlefield, shining knights, once cloaked in legend, stood alongside weary men in muddied tunics. In our imagination, these knights gleam with chivalric splendor, yet reality paints them as brutal opportunists. Their actions were often driven more by hunger for power than honor. Behind them, the humble foot soldiers, farmers, craftsmen, rogues became the sturdy backbone of medieval armies, wielding not noble swords, but wooden pikes. They shared neither glory nor names with history, yet their blood, their sweat, and the filthy camps they called home beat as the heart of every mighty war machine. Welcome to the untold stories beneath the armor. Let us step into a world often shrouded in legend, where knights resplendent in polished armor ride across the annals of history. But as twilight casts long shadows, the truth behind this gleaming facade emerges, a truth as gritty and raw as the land they once ruled. Knights, those seemingly noble figures, were more than just romanticized heroes of epic ballads. They were warriors birthed from the chaos of tribal disputes and feudal imperatives, their tales woven tightly with threads of power and survival. In an age marked by political turbulence and ceaseless conquest, knights were more than mere defenders of honor. They became the very instruments of authority and ambition. Engraved with emblems of loyalty, these armored figures were at times brutal enforcers pursuing land and status. The chronicles from these times, while not bereft of gallantry, depict many knights as fearsome warlords whose swords often crossed for dominion rather than defense. The life of a knight was not the glamorous existence of courtly romances, but one soaked in blood and fraught with treachery. As we strip away the polished veneer, what remains is a life defined by relentless training, fierce battles, and short-lived victories. From a young age, knights were taught the deadly dance of sword and lance, their days a litany of preparation for the chaotic symphony of war. Honor, that lofty ideal, frequently yielded to the harsh demands of mere survival. Among knights, the path of the mercenary was not unheard of, blurring the lines between noble cause and personal gain. Such knights, donning their armor for the highest bidder, ventured across kingdoms driven by gold more than glory. Their ambition often led down morally murky alleys, where strategic marriages, shrewd alliances, and land grabs were staples in the quest for supremacy. In the turbulent backdrop of their era, knights juggled a complex web of loyalty and self-interest. The chivalric code, a beacon of virtue, was juxtaposed with the pragmatic vector toward staying alive. The medieval landscape was unforgiving, and knights, despite their noble beginnings, encountered the same primal struggles as the common folk. Their narratives reveal a paradox. Knights, as icons of moral strength, yet drawn into the darker instincts of humanity. Knights were both arms of justice and symbols of tyranny. Their power extended beyond battlefields into courts and villages, where they upheld feudal order, collected taxes, and delivered judgment. Yet the line between order and oppression was famously thin. Exploiting their position, some knights crossed into the realm of tyrants, their capricious rule echoing through the ages as a testament to unchecked power. Bound by fealty, knights symbolized the intricately woven tapestry of tenant and vassal bonds defining medieval society. These connections required a delicate balance, where allegiance often danced on the precipice of ambition and opportunity. As feudal lords vied for power, knights found themselves navigating a shifting labyrinth where promises of land and wealth tempted them toward rebellion and treachery. Chivalry, with all its esteemed ideals, often faltered under the weight of reality. As guardians of valor, knights in practice oscillated between the principles of righteousness and the necessities of strategy. Widely celebrated tales reveal knights not only as ideal bearers of virtue, but also as complex beings grappling with the demands of war and politics. Within this landscape, the Knights Templar emerged as legendary figures, warrior monks sworn to protect pilgrims and hold sway in the Holy Land. Their rise and fall mirror the tensions of the time. Acts of zealous devotion clouded by accusations of heresy and quests for power. The dramatic trials faced by the Templars encapsulate this tension, highlighting a conflict between spiritual vows and earthly influence, casting them as both paragons and pariahs in the unfolding myth. Medieval literature played a crucial role in immortalizing these knightly figures, painting them as paragons of virtue in works like The Knight's Tale and Arthurian legends. These stories, more than romantic escapism, served as a lens through which society observed and reflected on its complexities. As knights straddled the line between reality and myth, these narratives crafted a symbiosis, building legends layered upon truths, capturing the imagination across generations. As the medieval period waned, changes in warfare and society nudged the knight into history's shadows. Advancements in military strategy gave rise to armies where discipline trumped individual valor. Even as their role diminished, the knight's legacy remains a chapter in the story of humanity's pursuit of greatness and infamy. Their myth represents a tapestry rich with contradictions, fads of improbable grandeur interlaced with hard realities in which history ebbs and flows, and in whose reverberations resonate the truth of their passage. In the shadow of medieval castles and under the wide, sullen sky, the call to arms echoed through the villages. For many peasants, this summons was an upheaval, tearing them from their fields like a storm uprooting trees. Kings and lords, eager to fortify their realms or extend their dominions, looked beyond the noble knights and conscripted farmers and craftsmen. A transformation that saw plowshares traded for spears in a fate as abrupt. This enlisted life, often bound by duty rather than desire, painted grim depictions of reluctant valor. Many men, lured by the promise of coins, clothing, or even a small plot of land, chose to follow a noble banner. The gamble between the harsh certainty of winter's chill and the uncertainty of battle was stark. Ironically, these supposedly minor players became pivotal in orchestrating grand strategies that shaped entire regions. The ranks of foot soldiers were as diverse as the lands from which they hailed, each individual a thread woven into the tapestry of medieval armies. Craftsmen versed in anvils and loom stood with those whose pasts were marred by outlawry. Mercenaries, soldiers of fortune, added a professional but volatile edge, their loyalties shifting with the weight of gold rather than allegiance. In a society unkind to idlers, enlistment was less about patriotism and more about survival. This melting pot of backgrounds often mirrored society itself, rich in experience, marred by contradictions, yet unified by necessity. Arming these soldiers was as much about pragmatism as it was about combat. Spears, axes, and pikes were their tools, sturdy and utilitarian rather than ornamental. Unlike the opulently equipped knights, foot soldiers wore mismatched armor leather, quilted gambesons, and salvaged metal bound together in function over form. The typical armory was born of necessity, each piece a testament to local blacksmith ingenuity. Such craftsmanship allowed soldiers to adapt their gear, forming an arsenal as resourceful as it was rugged. War's allure lay not only in valor, but also in the tantalizing prospect of reward, a potential escape from suffocating poverty. For many, standard wages were meager or non-existent. Instead, opportunity was found in plunder or the empty promises of their lords. Yet the gap between triumph and tragedy could be as thin as a blunted blade, striking a delicate balance. The spoils of war offered fleeting financial liberation, chance paths toward minor societal elevation. For those who survived unscathed, the dream of returning home with loot was a beacon. Though such successes were shadowed by envy and admiration in equal measure, adopting the role of soldier demanded a deep identity shift. Peasants balancing roles as husbands, fathers, and sons were suddenly thrust into the roles of warriors, bound more to battalion than to kin. The psychological toll of straddling these worlds could be immense. The serene cadence of pastoral life violently contrasted with war's chaos, demanding resilience. The conflict within these men mirrored the fields they left behind, an internal battleground of loyalty. These soldiers often found themselves in search of personal redemption amid chaos, their stories woven into the fabric of history as much as their deeds. Flexibility became a hallmark of the foot soldier's value. Shield walls, iconic in their solidarity, drew strength from the unity of those within. Using terrain to advantage amid confusion became crucial. Veterans learned to harness the rhythm of land into battlefield tactics, balancing agility with defense. Each soldier's effectiveness lay in the ability to read conflict like a seasoned farmer interpreting a begrudging harvest, turning chaos to advantage with nuance. Camaraderie among soldiers transformed the hardship of conflict into enduring brotherhoods. Unspoken rituals fostered deep bonds forged around fires, with tales of lands lost and dreams spun. Humor, dark and sardonic, was a saving grace, a balm that eased shared suffering. Campfires were arenas where dice games and stories mingled with symbolic tattoos, creating a fraternity that transcended social divisions. Kinship beneath banners, soaked in resilience, where simple acts of shared humanity persisted. Yet the scars born from service were indelible. Fractured bones and jagged scars were the physical reminders of wars waged and survived. Medieval medicine was grueling, leaving tales inked in sinew and bone. A language of courage transcended. With ethos returning from battlefields, veterans carried history within them, their eyes heavy with stories untold. Fitting back into village life was a battle anew, the cry of arms, a specter never far. While chronicles often favored tales of kings and knights, the legacy of these soldiers is profound. From humble inception, they transcribed unwritten histories, their valor reverberating through the ages. Their impact, though understated, crafted societies that valued endurance and sacrifice. Returned soldiers brought wider perspectives to civilian life, fueling change across cultural lines. Their stories, etched in time's ledger, remind us of an unyielding fraternity, a haunting testament to the human spirit's endurance. Knights begin their arduous journey at the tender age of 7. These young pages, enveloped in the tradition and discipline of noble households, a harsh reprimand, their bodies bearing the marks of a world that valued martial prowess above all. It etched loyalty and chivalry into their very soul, layered with violence and grand ceremony. Noble tournaments offered a stage where these qualities were tested and displayed. For these knights, loyalty to their lords was not born merely of devotion. Often it was a transaction cloaked in grandeur, an expectation of land, titles, and power governing their fealty. The chivalric code demanded honor, yet behind every pledge lay silent negotiations, binding them through parchment promises rather than unbreakable ties. Yet, while knights trained amid ceremony, foot soldiers faced a harsher initiation into warfare. Recruited from farms and workshops, these men transformed from blacksmiths to warriors out of necessity. Shoulder to shoulder in spear lines or wielding longbows, they engaged in a brutal education, often more in surviving audacity than honor. Their insights didn't emerge from textbooks, but from the battlefield, observing veterans and sharing in the grim realities of medieval warfare. This fostered a camaraderie among them, born not from grand oaths, but practical necessity and mutual dependence. Their loyalty lay as much in the bonds with fellow fighters as any distant lord's command. In theory, loyalty was the backbone of feudal ties, binding knights and soldiers to their liege lords. Yet, in practice, these allegiances were often fraught and deceptive. For common soldiers, survival often overshadowed allegiance. Their terms were simple: food, pay, and protection. Fleeing the filth and disease of camp life, even under threat of severe punishment, sometimes seemed the most rational choice. Desertion was not so much a shameful act as it was a testament to systemic failures, a desperate bid against starvation and the ever-looming specter of death when shared grievances went unanswered. Mutiny could arise as a force of rebellion. These acts went beyond mere chaos, often spurred by injustice or unbearable conditions. Yet mutinies were swiftly crushed with harsh repercussions, reinforcing the fragility of authority under the pressures of human endurance. Even in acts of disorder, mutinies sometimes forced commanders to face legitimate grievances. At times, collective dissent achieved what lone voices could not. Allegiances. Breaking an oath was a grave sin in the eyes of medieval society, yet knights regularly switched sides to further ambitions. Medieval Europe was a tapestry of feudal bonds, held together by the loose threads of convenience, where alliances were rearranged with each new pretender's claim to power. Chivalric oaths, though solemnly sworn, were often bargaining chips, with their sanctity easily dissolved by political pragmatism. Yet loyalty demanded a psychological toll not found in the pages of a herald's tome. The constant dance with shifting allegiances weighed heavily on the souls of both knights and foot soldiers. Trust was a rare currency. Knowing comrades could become foes as easily as friends. Within this crucible, unexpected bonds emerged from the blood and dirt, forming connections transcending titles. Knights may have betrayed lords for personal gain, and foot soldiers, too, might forsake comrades when survival eclipsed feudal duty. These soldiers of fortune remained beholden to the whims of fate. Beneath the chivalric oaths and stoic brotherhood lay trials and triumphs of filth, fear, and brotherhood. When picturing these camps, imagine a scene saturated with the rancid odor of decay and waste, where the concept of sanitation was little more than a distant dream. Knights and foot soldiers alike found themselves wading through a morass of rotting food, human refuse, and sometimes the bodies of fallen comrades left to the mercy of time and elements. In such grim conditions, disease was the constant companion, with dysentery the dreaded bloody flux sweeping through ranks as effectively as any enemy force. Even drinking water, often scarce and contaminated, was insidious in its potential for harm, pushing men to quench their thirst with ale or weak beer, safer choices thanks to their minimal alcohol content. Yet in this challenging environment, resilience became a necessary trait. The soldiers developed an unspoken immunity to their microbial surroundings, a grim advantage that kept some upright while sending others into the depths of fever and death. Survival demanded more than physical hardiness. It required camaraderie. Through shared struggles, men pooled their scant resources and knowledge. Together, they formed a hardened community, unified in the face of an unyielding existence. Fear was the constant hum beneath the surface, a near-visible presence that every soldier carried within. The brutality of medieval warfare demanded they accept mortality as a fact of life, especially when cloaked by the anonymity of night. Beyond the battlefield horrors, threats came from disease, starvation, finding solace in fleeting pleasures, or the camaraderie of shared experiences. From the specter of fear sprang deeply entrenched superstitions, rituals, over-perceived offenses, or ill omens, illustrating fear's dual role as both unifier and divider. Amid this gritty existence, a unique sense of brotherhood flourished. It was born of necessity, a bond transcending societal hierarchies and rooted in mutual suffering. The relentless trials of camp life forged unexpected alliances, uniting peasants and nobles in a shared fight for survival. This camaraderie was a lifeline, fostering loyalty and honor where rigid class lines typically reigned. Around campfires, stories and laughter intertwined with songs, acting as balm for weary souls and knitting bonds that often surpassed kinship in strength. Navigating the feast or famine nature of their diet was yet another test of endurance. Soldiers engaged in a culinary gamble dictated by fortune. Success in battle might yield a feast of freshly looted supplies, moments of revelry amid the endless austerity. But such times were transitory. In contrast, a steady threat of scarcity loomed during prolonged campaigns where supply lines faltered under pressure, with rations sometimes reduced to hard bread or gruel. Hunger served as a harsh, constant reminder of women played a crucial yet understated role, providing essential support that sustained camp life. Often wives, lovers, or widows, they were essential in daily operations, performing roles as varied as cooks and healers. Their activities created a semblance of normalcy, their domestic influence offering brief reprieves from the grim realities of war. Yet life in camps exposed them to violence and exploitation. Challenges they navigated with resilience. Their stories, woven into the larger tapestry of war, add depth and humanity to the narrative, revealing a surprisingly resilient force behind the front lines. In the rare moments of idleness, soldiers found release through simple games and competitions. Dice games, with their unpredictable throws, echoed the randomness of war, serving as both distraction and connection among men. Archery contests honed vital skills, while music and storytelling offered solace and communion beneath the stars. Such activities fostered a sense of unity and camaraderie amidst the tedium of waiting for the next battle call. Yet, order needed imposition within the chaos. Discipline was strict and punishment severe to maintain order. Violations, whether minor or grave, were met with harsh repercussions, from public whippings to execution for desertion. Justice was also a communal affair, with peer retribution ensuring cohesion as much as it strained relationships. Despite severity, there were moments when mercy surfaced, reminding one of humanity amid brutality. The looming threat of desertion was ever present, driven by fear, discontent, and homesickness. For some, escaping from the relentless grind of camp life seemed more appealing than enduring it. Yet tales of desertion, shrouded in empathy and complexity, illustrate the profound human yearning for autonomy and agency even under duress. In their transience, medieval armies were complex caravans reliant on intricate logistics across hostile terrains. Adaptability was key, each movement an unpredictable endeavor that later became stories of triumph and misadventure. Woven into this were the psychological battles each soldier fought, the emotional toll demanding unique coping mechanisms. Through faith, camaraderie, and shared resilience, soldiers crafted a psychological tapestry framing the harsh realities of medieval warfare. Picture a medieval battlefield, a raw and ever-shifting theater where terrain dictated the unfolding drama of life and death. The land, once untouched fields or meandering pastures, transformed swiftly into arenas of chaos, marked by the heavy tread of thousands of feet. Hills and forests offered silent companionship or concealed danger, influencing strategy as much as the enemy's disposition. Commanders viewing this tableau plotted their troops every step, acutely aware that every natural contour might become an ally or adversary. As foot soldiers prepared across these expanses, they felt the buzzing anticipation of imminent conflict, a hum resonating from both the earth and their collective fear. In this charged landscape, position often decided victory more than heroism could ever hope to. Holding the higher ground, feeling the sun warm on one's back, or relying on a river to guard a flank. These elements created the prelude to battle. These battles unfolded as a living chess game where commanders acted as orchestrating an intricate dance with stakes woven into the fabric of life and death. Archers held the rear, eagle-eyed, under the shadowed protection of helmets, while infantrymen formed dense ranks, each a cog in the martial machine, with cavalry poised elegantly on the flanks, ready to carve through enemy ranks. Then came the thunderous clash where destiny unfurled with the meeting of opposing lines. The uproar of metal clashing, bodies colliding, merged with cries that blurred the line between friend and foe. Soldiers, propelled by a cocktail of fear and fervor, moved in a grim dance, where each thrust of a spear or sweep of a blade could tip the balance of being. Amidst such disarray, generals' plans unraveled, leaving only the primal need to survive and the chaos of unrestrained battle for the infantry. The reality was raw field of endless endurance and grit. While knights charged, shrouded in dust, footmen held firm in their desperate malaise. Here, raw survival instinct overshadowed training's polish. The shield wall stood as a defiant bastion, a human barricade of overlapping shields and poised spears, a testament to collective resolve and unity. Each soldier knew the price of a single broken line, the potential collapse of the formidable living chain they comprised. It was easy to lose oneself amidst the mud and confusion where individual identities faded, and the survival of the man beside him weighed heavier than the distant notion of personal glory. In battle's whirl, simplicity reigned supreme. Infantry depended on cunning yet straightforward tactics. From the steadfast shield wall to the bristling phalanxes or outward-facing spear formations like a hedgehog. Here, men relied on strategic deftness to amplify their threat and minimize vulnerabilities. Foot soldiers were indispensable parts of a lethal engine, their success lying in the execution of orders like hold the line or push. Each man, both a solitary fighter and part of a greater machine, invoking tactics honed over centuries. Beyond the brutal press lay the archers, silent specters weaving death from afar. Their arrows carved paths through the skies, heralding chaos before embedding in flesh. These ranged warriors wielded death with precision, their volleyed strikes weaving terror into the fabric of battle long before swords clashed. Their impact could shatter formations and dictate the strategic ebb and flow, forcing generals to adapt or retreat. The medieval battlefield was a chaotic symphony, where every clashing blade contributed to an orchestra of war. The metallic resonance of sword against shield, the dull thud of axe meeting armor, all punctuated by visceral human sounds of shouted orders and pain. Above this tumult, the whip-like whistle of arrows offered a haunting soundtrack. Shields rang, hearts pounded, and hooves thundered to a relentless tempo, a score to which soldiers marched into the madness of battle. The cavalry charge, a sight of formidable elegance, brought its own unique terror. Armored knights and light horsemen surged in synchronized chaos, a force of raw kinetic power crashing into lines as a tidal wave might obliterate a shoreline. Yet even this splendor could falter before dug pits or a wall of disciplined infantry, turning the glorious might into a floundering mass. Fear itself became a weapon as potent as any blade, altering perceptions and decisions. An army's courage might falter at the sight of an advancing foe, their confidence shattered by echoed trumpets and unfurling banners. Reputation and strategic myths magnified terror, turning rumor into a formidable opponent in the minds of those on the field. Victory often stemmed from knowing when to harness chaos and quell panic, a testament to the power of mental fortitude over sheer physical might. To survive here demanded unyielding resilience, a quality embodied by the battle-hardened. These veterans understood the delicate balance of chaos and order, nurturing instinct and strategic foresight. New recruits relied on these seasoned souls, whose knowledge could guide them through a storm of flesh and metal with crafted precision. Post-battle, as silence settled over the field, the true cost of medieval conflict was laid bare, littered with broken bodies and the scatter of arms. Survivors, weighed by their existence against the somber quiet of the fallen, shouldered memories written in blood and steel. From these ashes rose narratives of resilience and human tenacity, standing as enduring testimonies in the turbulent weave of history. The medieval battlefield, a realm of both bold tragedy and life-altering triumph, lingers in the imagination as a stark reminder of the line between life and death in the Middle Ages. The distinction between a knight's sword and a foot soldier's spear was as sharp as the blades they wielded. A sword was more than a mere weapon for a knight. It represented power, lineage, and the chivalric code often linked to one's very identity. Blacksmiths crafted these swords with meticulous care, shaping steel into a balanced and resilient symbol of prestige, frequently graced with jewels and engravings, each one a piece of art. Despite their elegance, swords were also instruments of survival and dominance in brutal, blood-soaked fields. They sliced through not just enemy flesh, but the rigid societal barriers that maintained the order of feudal society. Yet, while a sword elevated its bearer to noble heights, it was also a stark reminder of the privileges that divided knight from commoner. In stark contrast, the spear was a democratic weapon, simple, effective, and easy to produce. It armed armies with efficient lethality. Soldiers constructed spears from wood and iron swiftly and cheaply, allowing entire regiments to form formidable barricades of sharp points. While knights derided them for their lack of grandeur, spears were devastatingly effective. Their long reach, capable of piercing a knight's armor or stopping a cavalry charge in its tracks. The spear turned the tide of battles, showcasing the collective might of those who had no claim to noble blood. Here lay the spear's quiet power. It was an equalizer, a tool that granted the common soldier the potential to challenge elite forces. Through sheer force of numbers and strategic teamwork, the craftsmanship behind these tools of war tells much of medieval priorities. Swords required masterful metallurgical skills, reflecting an economy where artistry and function meshed under noble patronage. Each sword bore heraldic symbols, intertwining the notions of duty and divine will. In contrast, crafting spears called for practicality, built for battle and less pomp. They embodied resourcefulness and adaptability, their straightforwardness, a testament to the feats ordinary men achieved in desperate times. The role of armor in medieval warfare was pivotal. For knights, armor was not just protection, but a testament to status. Built from steel linkages that could withstand sword blows, but were vulnerable to spear thrusts, aimed with clever precision at joints and gaps. Armor was prohibitively expensive, reinforcing the economic chasm between classes. A foot soldier's defense was often patched together, using padded garments or improvised pieces, a necessary adaptation against the armored might of knights. Tactics were essential for wielding swords and spears effectively. Knights used coordinated, thunderous charges to break enemy lines, reliant on shock tactics and intimidation. Their mounted advances emphasized spectacle and ritualistic power. In contrast, infantry-wielding spears formed disciplined ranks. Spear walls designed to halt even the fiercest cavalry assault. embodying the essence of collective resilience over individual valor. The spear demanded cohesion, a communal mindset in which survival hinged on unity rather than the isolated exploits of heroism. Beyond their martial utility, swords and spears played deeply symbolic roles in medieval ideology. Swords were the stuff of legend, features of mythic tales that placed them at the heart of royal and divine narratives. They symbolized divine justice, their crossguard mirroring the sacredness of spiritual combat. Spears, though less romanticized, spoke of perseverance, a cultural emblem of the common soldier's enduring fight against oppression and adversity. Where swords reflected individual glory, spears celebrated communal strength, bridging historical narratives of resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. The psychological impact of these weapons on the battlefield was significant. A knight charging with a sword was terror wrapped in awe, an avatar of noble ferocity. Yet his supremacy was checked by the collective strength of the spear wall. The spear imparted courage, giving foot soldiers the psychological edge to face armored enemies, their sheer numbers turning fear into fortitude. As warfare evolved, so did the sword and spear. Technological advances saw swords crafted for new types of conflicts and social functions, while spears gave rise to diverse polearms that met changing battlefield demands. Yet through these transitions, both arms left indelible impressions on cultural consciousness, embodying myths that persisted long after gunpowder changed the face of war. Today, the legacy of swords and spears resonates through history as more than relics of battle. They are reminders of human ambition and perseverance. These weapons were not just forged steel, but narrative vessels that carried the societal values and struggles of medieval people, speaking to their timeless quests for honor, survival, and collective identity. Beneath the vivid splendor of medieval banners, resentment simmered like a hidden storm. Knights draped in ornate armor and living the privileges of their noble birth often looked down upon the humble foot soldiers. For these common men, torn from fields and workshops, those grand symbols represented not just the kingdoms they served, but a rigid hierarchy that relegated them to the bottom. Desperation and silent aspirations intertwined, fostering a deep undercurrent of discontent. Fighting for survival and meager livelihood, their expendability was a bitter realization, more pungent than the grime that permanently stained their hands. In this world, the expectation of loyalty clashed with the raw, harsh realities of medieval warfare's hierarchy. The frustrations were deeply rooted in lived experiences. Foot soldiers often bore the brunt of campaigns, wading through mud and blood as the knights rode above. Disparity in rewards and recognition heightened tensions, with knights reaping substantial gains for collective victories, while the common soldiers were quickly forgotten. Each battle formed a harrowing tableau, with foot soldiers defending against seasoned knights, all the while knowing their sacrifices would be the first to vanish from memory. Imagine standing in the midst of fallen comrades, only to realize that yesterday's victories would soon be cast aside. Beneath the banners, there was not only fluttering heraldry, but a brewing storm of resentment awaiting the right spark. Knights thrived in a culture that exalted lineage and martial prowess, accompanying a divine right to command. As symbols of gallantry, they were often insulated from the war machine's grinding gears, which consumed countless lives. Viewing themselves more as commanders of destiny than part of an army, their status casts long shadows over the foot soldiers, exacerbating the divides in armor, weaponry, and living conditions. This disconnect became stark as knights saw a soldier's death as a mere statistic, whereas the fall of a fellow knight was draped in mourning. However, for the foot soldiers, knights appeared as privileged overseers, their lives encased in metal and alliances, while theirs were deemed expendable. Shared trenches were arenas where suspicion and envy brewed, reinforcing divides through every decree delivered from above and heightening the volatility among the common soldiers. The foot soldiers bore the unseen weight of sacrifice, forming the backbone of medieval armies without receiving due recognition. When the call to arms sounded, it was not just knights who responded, but cobblers, blacksmiths, and farmhands who traded tools for weapons. Each step on foreign soil was burdened with the weight of personal sacrifices, marked by longing for farmsteads and families left unattended. Yet, in victory songs, their contributions slipped quietly into the shadows of knightly tales. From dawn to dusk, the life of a foot soldier was a testament to relentless endurance and suffering. The disparity in rewards widened resentment, reducing sacrifices to invisible contributions, a mere side note in the annals of celebrated knightly valor, dot in the cauldron of battle. However, class distinctions sometimes blurred. Survivalist camaraderie emerged amidst shared hardships and valor, forging bonds that defied aristocratic norms. Standing side by side, knights and foot soldiers charged foes and defied death, finding unity in their shared struggle. Yet these alliances were fleeting, quickly overshadowed by the reality of noble privileges once the battle ended. Gathered around campfires, sharing tales of daring escapes, foot soldiers knew the transience of such bonds. A knight's fleeting camaraderie was often overwhelmed by the routine return to disparity, leaving soldiers to contend with the harshness of their ordinary lives. Acts of defiance by foot soldiers thrived in this medieval theater, lowering their heads without being broken. They resisted the hierarchical injustices ingrained in the medieval military structure. Desertion, though punishable by death, remained common as soldiers sought refuge elsewhere, evading the grip of their feudal overlords. Subtle acts of sabotage, misplaced arms, delayed orders were channels of protest. Through tales of knightly folly, mocking songs exchanged in hushed tones, they voiced hidden dissent, though such acts rarely changed the overarching system. They fostered a sense of autonomy among these men. Retreats magnified underlying tensions as order dissolved into chaos. Class distinctions could dissolve or explode in the frenzy. For knights, a retreat was a reckoning, a blow to their honor. For foot soldiers, it represented a pragmatic decision between life and folly. As knights fled, desperation brewing to maintain their status, foot soldiers were often left to grapple with betrayal. These collisions exposed the raw core of alliances and left scars on both the battlefield and soldiers' hearts. The constant undercurrent of resentment meant alliances were tenuous. Fractured alliances created vulnerabilities that enemy forces could exploit, with fragile trust sometimes turning to bitter fruit on the battlefield. The reality of knights as manipulators led foot soldiers into viewing them as stewards of their peril, and unequal treatment fueled rebellion. Disillusionment set in early as broken promises of glory revealed bitter truths, leaving cynical skepticism in place of knightly reverence. Knights hailed as wise leaders often overlooked the foot soldiers' worth, ignoring their lived war experiences. This oversight bred lost battles and fractured armies, where retreat became a pragmatic choice, underestimated by knights, blinded by their reflections. Beneath every banner lies a story of hope and struggler, testament to humankind's search for recognition amid war and class complexities. Gathering around, let us step into the mud-laden fields of Bannockburn in 1314, where the Scottish under Robert the Bruce transformed a swampy terrain into a formidable ally. With pikes gripped tightly in calloused hands, Scottish foot soldiers stood firm against the dazzling menace of English knights, whose pride lay in their noble lineage and shining armor. The marshy ground conspired with the Scots, turning these knights' formidable steeds into liabilities. What looked like an assured victory for the armored nobles quickly unraveled into chaos as the disciplined Schiltranza defensive ring held by the Scots pierced both the flesh and pride of their enemies. This was no tale of knights' individual bravado, but a collective uprising where the anonymous multitude turned the tide of battle and carved their names into history's stone, albeit without the ink of recognition. Fast forward a century to the rain-soaked fields of Agincourt in 1415. Here, the English army, heavily reliant on longbowmen, faced a tremendous French force. The heavy rain from the previous night created a quagmire that turned the battlefield into an unlikely ally. As the French knights lumbered across mud-soaked fields, English longbowmen let loose volleys of arrows that filled the air like ominous shadows, protected by pointed stakes. These common men wielded their longbows with lethal precision. The French chivalry, bogged down and bewildered, met their fate not in the noble melee, but in the hellish muck. What unfolded was a triumph of grit over polish, of the mud-caked common soldier seizing glory over the shimmering knight. Meanwhile, in 1302, the Flemish army turned the Battle of Courtrai into another cornerstone of infantry strength, known for the golden spurs snatched as trophies. This clash between the Kingdom of France and the County of Flanders highlighted the power of urban militia, artisans and traders, normally shielded from the terrors of war, employed cunning tactics and terrain to their advantage. They thwarted the French knights' charge with ingenious fortifications and strategic marshes. These unsuspecting heroes translated their unpolished experience into unyielding resilience, confronting the best Europe had to offer with little beyond sheer determination and crude weaponry. In the siege of Orleans, while much is made of Joan of Arc's valor, let us not forget the anonymous voices whose deeds underpinned the miracle of 1429. The defenders, made up of common soldiers, proved critical to the city's endurance. Under constant threat, they performed the dangerous task of breaking enemy lines to reverse fortunes. It wasn't just high tactics, but an unheralded tenacity that preserved Orleans. They were resolute, conducting daring raids in the murk of night, strengthening the will of a beleaguered city with acts of quiet heroism across the landscape of medieval war. We find the inventive spirit of the common soldier reshaping the very fabric of battle itself. Take the wagon forts of the Hussite Wars, where peasants formed mobile barricades of chained wagons from which they repelled attacks with modified farming tools and hand cannons. These makeshift forts became their rampart. Their ingenuity achieved what gleaming steel could not, belittling the power of expensive armored knights. Lest we forget, chronicles and letters recount the frontline experiences from those who slogged through medieval horrors. Stirling Bridge in 1297 captured the spirit of foot soldiers and low-born nobility, using the familiar terrain as both a shield and weapon. Similarly, letters paint visceral pictures of chaos and laughter amid the blood and gore, recording how men united against all odds using shared, whispered encouragements and shoulder-to-shoulder potency in the cacophony of battle. The shared struggles wove an invisible chain of brotherhood. Here lay unity beyond mere alliances, beyond edicts from high lords. It was a world where even wounded souls would lend strength to another, stitching together bonds forged in both triumph and tragedy. As they stood against disease, starvation, and the enemy's onslaught, it was their brotherhood an unmovable anchor amidst the storm which often tipped the scale between life and death. Victories achieved under these dire circumstances set ripples that disturbed the rigid waters of medieval society. They quietly challenged established norms and redefined valor beyond noble birth. Their triumphs defied conventional wisdom and shaped the course of society, whispering subversively into the ears of kings and commoners alike, sowing the seeds for gradual transformation. So, as flickering firelight dims on this tale, remember that though the spotlight often danced upon royals and knights, it was the sweat-drenched, ruddy faces of these unsung masses that truly bore witness to the harsh rub of battle. Their lives tell a story, etched not in regal tapestry, but in the land itself, narrative of common people overcoming obstacles perennially against the odds, leaving marks that transcend time's linear narrative. In the theater of medieval warfare, death played the undiscriminating role of an omnipresent actor, indifferent to the status or valor of its victims. Silent arrows shot through the air, ignoring the gleaming armor of knights as easily as the threadbare tunics of foot soldiers. The chaos of battle reduced everyone to their most basic essence, human lives caught in the merciless lottery of combat. Warriors wielded swords that could just as easily find the heart of a nobleman as that of a commoner. Shields and heraldry provided no defense against the randomness of a crossbow bolt. Leveling the elaborate social distinctions, medieval life, so carefully constructed, the fear of death was palpable, a specter that hovered over each soldier. Yet, it also bound these men in a curious camaraderie, despite the rigid hierarchies that defined their everyday lives. Facing mortality elided distinctions, creating an unspoken kinship among the men as they confronted a shared fate. Together they, perhaps unwillingly, embraced the grim understanding that death held no preference for lineage or legacy, treating all with the same apathetic inevitability. Beyond the immediate brutality of swords and arrows, disease loomed as an even craftier foe. The unhygienic conditions of the camp were a breeding ground for maladies more calamitous than any battle. Plague, dysentery, and typhoid swept through camps, respecting no rank as they claimed kings and stable boys alike. Medieval medicine, entrenched in superstition rather than science, offered little respite, where combat allowed for a swift exit. Disease was a slow tormentor, altering the fates of entire armies and at times changing the very course of history. Amid this tapestry, priests moved quietly, offering solace where they could. On the brink of battle, soldiers sought to make peace with their maker. Last confessions were murmured to priests as somber rituals took place in the dim light of dawn. Religion provided a glimmer of hope, a promise of salvation beyond the battlefield, where war's unpredictable cruelty held sway. Yet not all was left to the mercy of sword and soul. Combat left behind a haunting legacy of wounds. The battlefield, rife with gory injuries, was a place where a knight with a shattered leg met the same grim decisions as a peasant pierced by a bolt. Medieval treatments, more brutal than compassionate, often involved painful remedies, cauterization, and crude amputations, each a desperate gamble for survival. Crossbowmen and archers, often underrated yet lethal, delivered death from afar. Their arrows and bolts arriving without fanfare were the whispers of doom that could decide the fate of battles. The deadly precision of an arrow could humble even the mightiest, bypassing armor and prestige alike. This quiet devastation prefigured a new form of warfare, one that would come to characterize future conflicts. The aftermath of battle demanded swift, pragmatic responses to the inevitability of death. The fallen lay scattered, stripped of the social identities that had once defined them. Mass graves became common, swallowing individuals into a collective anonymity. This practical approach served both as a deterrent against disease and a testament to war's unfeeling nature. The anonymous pits, while a burial of the individual, symbolized a shared sacrifice and bonded memory of loss, a legacy to be whispered among the living. Despite the finality of death, stories of bravery persisted, spun into legends by wandering minstrels and chroniclers. These tales commemorated the gallantry of knights and the resilience of soldiers. Songs and stories immortalized their deeds, even as rain and time erased their traces from the earth. The legends celebrated heroism and offered a solemn remembrance of the lives consumed by war. Death, paradoxically, also drove change. The demise of a single noble could shift power dynamics, upend realms, and create far-reaching societal changes. With heirs on the field and succession lines in jeopardy, the structure of kingdoms rested on the uncertain outcomes of battle. From families, the loss of father, son, or brother brought immediate hardship, prompting societal shifts as widows assumed new roles and communities readjusted to the absent. The medieval outlook was steeped in the inevitability of death. Artistic representations reflected this acceptance, from the dance of death illustrating the universality of mortality to the folklore and songs that entwined life's joys with its impermanence. These cultural expressions served as both a mourning and a celebration of life's intangible essence. For those who fought, awareness of mortality cultivated a unique introspective perspective. The looming certainty of death kindled both existential reflection and a vibrant appreciation for life's transient beauty. Letters penned in the quiet, interludes of war, speak of the futility of ambitions and the sublime simplicity of existence, offering a glimpse into the souls of men who lived within mortality's shadow. These expressions became woven into the cultural fabric, forging legends that spoke not only to their era, but resonated through time, whispering the age-old truth that life shadowed by death is to be cherished even as it fades. In the grand tapestry of history, knights and kings often capture the imagination, wrapped in layers of song and story. Yet lurking behind every celebrated battle and majestic retelling is the untold narrative of countless foot soldiers, the nameless thousands whose resilience shaped outcomes and victories. Drawn from peasantry and serfdom, their weapons were often crude, their armor mere leather or cloth. These men bore the burden of wars, their sacrifices laying the foundations upon which legends were constructed. Despite their anonymity, these soldiers were indispensable. Their lives, burdened by hardship and brevity, contributed as much to victories sung across generations as the shining knights who led them into combat. The paradox of their anonymity is captured in chronicles that focused on knightly valor, while overlooking these shadowy figures whose contributions were essential, albeit unrecognized. Without their steadfast endurance, those much celebrated victories would barely exist in the annals of time. Behind every soldier lies a human story, peasant farmers, blacksmiths, or villagers propelled into the brutal necessities of warfare, pressed into service or lured by plunder's promise. They traded their plows and anvils for an uncertain future in allegiance to a lord or ruler. Such transformations were abrupt, with scant training, driven by economic struggles and territorial feuds. These men were driven by varying motivations: escape from burdens, the lure of adventure, and the promises of glory. The shift from civilian life to soldier was more mental leap than physical metamorphosis. Once laboring in familiarity, they now donned the mantle of mortality, becoming warriors forged from desperation. Their contributions went unrecorded in peacetime annals. Yet the camaraderie and bonds formed on the battlefield were undeniable. These relationships transformed them, uniting desperate men into forces capable of facing medieval chaos. Their personal stories, overshadowed by knightly narratives, became the unquantifiable bedrock of military engagements. The medieval battlefield was chaotic, brutal, and unforgiving. Foot soldiers faced harsh environments with simple spears, axes, or repurposed farm tools. Hand-to-hand combat blurred the lines of life and death, where the outcome often relied less on armor than on sheer resolve. These battles were up close and personal, their victories determined by the mass fury of soldiers, who formed human walls that even disciplined knights couldn't penetrate. Amid this chaos, profound bonds formed among foot soldiers, cultivated by shared survival and mutual understanding. Lived experiences in camps forged trust and loyalty, extending beyond mere survival to encompass deep friendships. Soldiers from desperate backgrounds found solidarity, uniting through hardship and mutual defense, fighting for each other as much as for a cause. This unity softened warfare's relentless nature and offered solace amid uncertainty. Despite fighting on the same battlefields, knights and foot soldiers inhabited vastly different worlds. Class divisions underscored this contrast, with knights glamorized by chivalric codes and soldiers perceived as mere support. This gap extended beyond the battlefield, influencing societal perceptions. Disdainful glances from knights bred resentment, Yet the hierarchy persisted due to entrenched social structures and the need for discipline. Occasionally, survival would forge moments of mutual respect. Bridging the social chasm, historical retellings romanticize battles, transforming grim realities into legends, while chronicles extol knightly virtues. Masked ranks of soldiers were often the true heroes. Their struggles wove the fabric of mythic Europe, and their presence breathed life into medieval warfare. Artistic depictions obscure their faces, depicting them as indistinct figures. Yet they remained the heart of any conflict. War, the great equalizer, tasted both noble blood and peasant flesh without prejudice. On medieval battlefields, social distinctions crumbled before the indiscriminate reach of death. Arrows and swords claimed lives regardless of rank. Disease, injury, and fatigue were equal in the chaos. Allies were forged from necessity rather than feudal obligation, leaving tales that reminded future generations of shared vulnerability amidst war's specter. The landscapes where medieval armies clashed silently witnessed courage and sacrifice. Fields, rivers, and hills bore witness to dramas as they unfolded, enriched by the lives of soldiers who fought and died there. Transformed over centuries, these spaces echo with history, serving as reminders of mortality and valor. Such sights, beyond their military significance, epitomize courage across all ranks. Though largely unheralded, the legacy of foot soldiers permeates cultural consciousness. Oral traditions, folk tales, and myths capture their contributions, offering glimpses into complex medieval experiences. Ballads and local stories echo the courage and survival instincts of these anonymous warriors, validating their sacrifices. Within the human psyche, modern reinterpretations honor perspectives once silenced, showing that every historical layer bears tales ready to be uncovered. As our journey concludes, we reflect on the profound impact of foot soldiers in medieval history. Though overshadowed by knightly grandeur, they were the critical underpinning of military endeavors. These men faced extraordinary circumstances with resilience, shaping human conflict and resolution. Their names may remain obscured, but their legacy thrives in the epic tales we explore today. Let us remember their contributions, acknowledging them not as mere shadows in history, but as intrinsic architects of the medieval era. If you've been captivated by these tales of the past, consider hitting like and subscribe to our channel for more stories that bring history alive.